And as the confusion deepens and the narrative war intensifies, we have top US war historian Phillips O'Brien with the US to decode for us exactly what has been happening for the last several days and the strategy, the signals, and the stakes at large. Joining us for more on the situation between US as well as Israel and Iran in regards to the war, we have with us Professor Phillips O'Brien, who's a professor of strategic studies at the University of St. Andrews, is also a noted historian and strategic affairs expert. Thanks so much for joining us. Let me begin by asking you about what President Trump recently announced. He spoke about a 5-day postponement of planned strikes on Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure, citing very good and productive conversations. Now, given Tehran's immediate and unequivocal denial that any such talks have taken place, how do you interpret this public contradiction?
There's two ways to read it, and no one in actually Washington seems entirely sure what happened. One view is that there were low-level talks, that there had been reaching out by Iranian sources to other states and actually American out to the Iranian. They had made basic contact, and that was enough for Trump, who wants to get out of the war, to say, okay, your talks are ongoing, and this gives me a way to start getting out of the war. So that's one view. The other view is that this was entirely different. He needed to calm the markets, that the price of oil was skyrocketing, the stock market was crashing, that he actually isn't going to get out of the war. He wants to escalate, but he has to wait till U.S. forces are in place. So what he did is he took advantage of something to basically say, I won't attack for 5 days, hoping to calm the markets, but then he still does plan to escalate. And nobody knows. I mean, no one, actually, Trump might not know exactly what the plan is, but certainly in the short term, it's, I think, to try and keep the price of oil from going up too much and to keep the stock market from crashing. What he does in the end is still very much open for question.
Right. In fact, Iran has said as much. They've in fact called these announcement efforts to lower energy prices and buy time for military plans. In fact, Iranian state television also ran a graphic stating that US president backs down following Iran's firm warning, quote unquote. Now, do you think that this is an embarrassing public setback for the Trump administration? How do these sort of optics reflect on the credibility of such a strategy?
Well, it depends where the U.S. ends up in 5 or 6 days. I mean, if it actually turns out this was a chance to bluff the market and he's planning to escalate, then actually he didn't back down. He's planning to make the war wider. If, on the other hand, this is a statement where he's saying, look, I'm going to leave the Iranian regime in power. There's nothing I can do about it. I'm going to try and cut a deal with Iran to get the straits open. Then I would say, yeah, this is actually a pretty humiliating defeat for Donald Trump, who went to war assuming he could get rid of the Iranian leadership in a few days and put in a new government. And then he's actually stuck admitting he can't do that. The Iranians have forced him to sort of come back to the negotiating table, and he's achieved nothing. So I don't want to say it is right now him backing down, because we don't know where we're going to end up in 5 or 6 days. But if indeed we are now with Trump basically saying the Iranian regime is going to stay and we'll reach a deal, then yes, he has backed down and he has failed.
Right. Now, at the beginning of this war, we all saw how President Trump sort of began by projecting a short, decisive campaign. He even declared victory early on. But as we're entering the 4th week, as in we've entered the 4th week with Iran still retaliating, the U.S. is now pausing strikes and exploring talks. Do you think he entered this conflict without a clearly defined objective and strategy and is now looking at a face-saving exit as ground realities are quite divergent from the initial expectations? In fact, we've heard everything from regime change to the threat of nuclear weapons as a possible objective. But those objectives are not being spoken about at the moment.
Well, I think we can say that he started the war not knowing what he was doing, not knowing what he was unleashing. He started the war, and from what we can tell, he thought it would be a bit like his more recent experience in Venezuela, that he would get rid of the present leader, put in place a new leader with whom he could do business and get down to declaring victory and making money. That's what Trump likes to do. That's what he did in Venezuela. He completely underestimated the ability of the Iranians to fight back and adapt. And he, I think, underestimated the resolve of the system. So his original, he did have a goal to begin with, which is to win, to get rid of the Iranian leadership and to win the war very quickly. From that point on, there has been no consistency in Washington about what this war is for. Is it to destroy the Iranian Navy, destroy the Iranian missile production? Is it to destroy the nuclear program? All of these different reasons are being thrown out, but never clearly that there's not one argument about what it's for. So I think now all Trump is looking to do is find something that he can declare victory on. It's really important to him to be able to say, I've won. All right, that might you say is the victory condition he has. The problem is, and he says it all the time now. I mean, if you listen to what the U.S. government has said, it's already won the war about 50 times. He's always winning. We've destroyed the Iranian military, 100% destroyed the Iranian military. Well, at some point that becomes ridiculous if you're still fighting 4 weeks later. So he's searching around for something that he can say is a victory. And the Iranians, I think, know that that makes him vulnerable. And that's why their strategy in the Straits of Hormuz has been effective. It's very hard for Trump to say, I've won, if the Iranians are blocking traffic in the Straits of Hormuz. And that's why they put him in this very difficult situation where either he has to give the Iranians a very good deal or he has got to escalate. And he's going to have to throw more American force to try and force the Straits open. It's the dilemma that he is facing.
Right. Now, we've also seen that Trump had claimed that negotiations with Iran are underway. We've seen Israel-US strikes that have just hit gas facilities and a pipeline in Isfahan and in Khorramshahr, and Iran has launched missile attacks on Tel Aviv, injuring 6 people. Earlier, he insisted that the U.S. knew nothing about the South Pass attack. Now, does this suggest that the president has lost command and control over the manner in which this conflict was taking place, or is it just that he was grandstanding, bluffing, perhaps?
He doesn't care about, and then one of the problems he has, he doesn't care about details. Like on the Pars attack, from what we can tell, actually, he might have said, go to the Israelis, go ahead and do it, not knowing what he was doing. He probably didn't even know what the oil field was. So it's hard to say, does he know what he's doing or not doing, or what he's approving or not approving? Because he's never really cared about details. He doesn't get daily briefings. He's not the kind of president where someone comes in and says, these are the big issues of the day. So he thinks he provides just general overall leadership and people will do what he wants. But he's also, by the way, learning the limitations of U.S. This is a very brutal lesson about the limitations of what the U.S. could do. He, I think, had assumed, because of Venezuela, he could overthrow a leader and just win a war. But actually, it's far more difficult. And so he doesn't know what to attack or what not to attack. So 2 days ago, he made what was probably the stupidest threat in the history of U.S. warfare, which was the threat to blow up Iran's power system. That was a threat he made in a tweet. He said, I will, in 48 hours, I will blow up the Iranian power system, starting with their biggest plant. Well, not only is that a war crime, and it would be a war crime under almost all elements, it also means that the Iranians will fire back on desalinization plants or power plants in Israel and the Gulf. And he didn't understand what he was saying. He just thought, I'll be big and strong and I'll make this threat. And then 2 days later, he has to embarrassingly get out of it because the threat was so stupid and counterproductive that he has to say, okay, well, I'm not going to do it for 5 days. So I think that's the typical way he acts. He doesn't actually understand a lot of the time what he's doing because he also believes he can just change track anytime and people will follow him. He can say A today, he can say B tomorrow, and everyone will be fine with that.
Right. Now, we've seen how the White House describes the situation as fluid, even as President Trump speaks of constructive talks. Now, does this suggest that the contingency loopholes are already being built into the narrative to allow for some kind of room if there are shifting positions in the future and if these talks don't materialize? How do you see that?
Absolutely. I mean, we don't even know how serious these talks are. I think it's pretty clear to say there have been some contacts. All right, and that's different than negotiations. But there have been some contacts between the U.S. government and the Iranian government through intermediaries. That, I think, there's been something. But we don't know if they should be classified as negotiations. We have no idea if any terms have been discussed. Trump seemed to make it sound like there had been a lot of negotiations. The Iranian response is like, no, there's been nothing that we would call talks. And so it doesn't solve anything. It gives, I think, some leeway for the next few days to see what happens. If we see actually real talks take place, then maybe there is something to this. If after 5 days there's been nothing, then probably we're back to U.S. escalation.
Right. Now, we've seen what U.S. and Israel have done in the form of killing of multiple Iranian top regime leaders. The regime still, however, appears to be largely intact. Do you think that both sides severely underestimated the capabilities as well as the resilience of Iran's third and fourth tier leadership?
Well, they obviously did. I don't think there's any doubt about that. That they I think in the United States case had overread too much into Venezuela. In Israel's case, I'm not sure they actually wanted what we'd call classical regime change. I think they just wanted to damage Iran as much as possible, so that the United States and Israel might have had slightly different strategic objectives going into it. But the Iranian regime has been in power since 1979. It has very deep security services. It has very brutal rule. It knows how to control the population. It knows how to fight uprisings. It's fought a number of major uprisings in the last few years and put them down with a great deal of force. This is not a regime that is going to roll over and die. And if that was the Trump assumption, then he simply didn't know what he was doing. And yes, the Iranian regime has so far proved much more resilient than he seemed to understand. I don't know whether the Israelis thought it would be that easy to get rid of them, but Trump did.
Right. Now, this is also a very important question in terms of the difference of, approach and assessment as far as U.S. and Israel is concerned. Because on the one hand, you have President Trump, who's talking about these productive talks with Iran, which are underway. He's also signaled there would be a pause. Yet, we've seen how Netanyahu states that they are continuing heavy strikes on Iran's missile and nuclear programs, as well as Hezbollah, and he cited, quote-unquote, tremendous achievements with the U.S. military. Now, how do you assess this clear divergence in the messaging that's coming through between what Washington, D.C. and Tel Aviv are saying, and does this really mean that Israelis were not taken on board as far as these negotiations were concerned?
Well, I mean, the Israeli position, which, by the way, goes back to their attacks last summer, is they want to damage Iranian military capacity as much as possible. They didn't want to stop last summer. When they were stopped in last June, it was because Trump ordered them to stop. So the Israeli position has been very consistent for a while. What they want to do is degrade Iranian strength as much as possible. They want to take out any military facility they can, any production facility that makes anything to do with weapons. The Israelis want to weaken it. That's not necessarily the American position. The American position originally was we want a leader we can work with. And we want to declare victory. So that might be the tension might be if Trump seriously wants a way out, and he might want a way out, then the Israelis might once again be forced to stand down when they would rather continue the campaign. So that could be the kind of area in which there are tensions between the two. We just don't know, though, whether Trump really does want a way out or whether he's waiting a few more days to get force in place to escalate.
Right. Now, you've also argued that the biggest beneficiary of this war through the higher energy prices and potential sanctions relief is Russia. So do you see this as a strategic miscalculation in that sense by the Trump administration, which has been forcing the world to not engage with Russia and buy their oil, including countries such as India, because we are looking at a situation where officials in the US are also now considering or have, in fact, eased the restrictions on Iranian oil, which has been sanctioned for quite some time now, at least the oil that's stranded in the Persian Gulf.
Well, if this ends up, this war, with the Iranian regime still in power, and that looks to be the American position now, then the two great winners will be Russia and China. Russia has had immediate benefit. And by the way, we have to be very careful in saying that that was not actually something Trump wanted. Trump is very supportive of Putin. He's gone after India because India, in his mind, was an easy target. So it wasn't actually to hurt Russia, it's to show his power. So he went after India because he can pretend that he's being anti-Russian, when really he's not anti-Russian in any way. He's very close to Putin. And this war, immediately, as one could have imagined, I mean, it wasn't a mistake. As soon as you went to this war, it was going to help Russia because the price of oil skyrocketed. And he helped it not just by having oil skyrocket. He got rid of any sanctions at that point, but he's gone beyond that. He's even taken business people off of the do not do business list. He's gone back to business with Belarus. So in fact, Russia has been helped immensely by this. Not only that, the United States has used up a lot of weapons, so there's nothing that can go to Ukraine. Not that Trump really would have given Ukraine much, but for Russia, this has been a transformative thing. They are now far more money than they had. They know Ukraine's going to run out of air defense again, the high end. So for Russia, this war has been an unparalleled success. It's really helped them at a time when they were looking quite weak. For the Chinese, I think it's even, in the long term, maybe a better benefit than for Russia's immediately. China now is looking at this, and people are seeing a really dangerous, slightly out of control United States acting impulsively, using military force without understanding what it's doing. And the Chinese can say, look, we're stable. This is unstable. America's unstable. We are stable. And if at the end of this, the Iranian regime remains the Iranian regime, it will become even more pro-China. And the other thing is it's also shown how scared Trump is of China. That you know who is shipping more oil out of the Gulf now than when this started? It's Iran. Iran has been allowed to ship oil out of the Gulf, and the United States won't stop it. A lot of that oil is going to China, and the United States is too afraid to stop it.
Right. And, one interesting thing that also we've seen is that Trump has indicated that it's actually Secretary of War Pete Hegseth who was the first person on his team to push for military action against Iran. He's publicly stated that Hegseth is the one who urged, let's do it, because Iran can't be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. Now, does this attempt to place the onus of starting the war on Hegseth point towards an effort to deflect responsibility from the president himself?
Yeah, he's done this a few times so far. He, by the way, blamed Rubio. A few weeks ago, after the first week, he said, oh, actually, Rubio, Marco, you were the one responsible for this. And yesterday, he said it was Hegseth. Whenever he's doing that, it's a sign that he's worried. Because how Trump gets by, when something goes well, he claims all the success. And when something goes wrong, it's never his fault, it's someone else's fault. So that's been his way of operating for his entire career. And if he's talking about other people made the decision to do this, it wasn't me, it's because he's worried it isn't going well, and he is looking for scapegoats. Look, Hegseth is Trump's creature. The idea that Hegseth would force Trump into doing something that Trump didn't want to do is nonsense. Hegseth is terrified of Trump. He basically lives to get Trump's approval. So, I mean, he might have to take the fall for Trump if this goes belly up, but this was not Hegseth. This was Trump. Trump made the decision for this. He might now not want people to know that, but that's the reality.
All right. Professor Phillips O'Brien, thank you so much for taking the time out and speaking to us here at Times Now.
Thanks. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
The News Hour at